As you heard, I'm not a state animal health regulator, but I used to play one on TV, and so I've been given the opportunity to just run through some outbreak terminology to kind of set you up. One of the things that's most important about these type of exercises is getting everybody kind of looking at the same thing and understanding where we're at and using the same terminology. And so, being one, not to reinvent the wheel, I stole slides from Dr. Zach and Dr. Roth, so thank you very much for letting me steal your slides. And we'll get this done real quick and keep moving on. Really what you need in an outbreak situation is the ability to get everybody in the same headspace as to what phase of an outbreak you're in and the type of outbreak that you're addressing. And what that does is it allows you the opportunity to apply different concepts and strategies to managing an outbreak. If you haven't read this document, this is in Confed Prep. It was originally the concept written by Dr. Roth to look at basically trying to do just that, taking an outbreak and breaking it into phases and types so you can figure out how you're going to respond based upon the information that you've got. And so if you look at the phases, and I'm basically in your packet is the phases and types document. And I'm not going to read through every single line of slide, this, that, and the other. You can read just as well. The important thing to know is that this particular approach allows us to actually get in that same headspace so we're all talking about the same time in an outbreak. So we've got a heightened alert phase. That's when we don't have FMD in the United States, but it's in Canada and Mexico. We have a phase 1 where we have FMD confirmed in the United States. This phase basically is in place until there's reasonable evidence to estimate an outbreak event. What we're shooting for is 4 days. Kind of get the information for the scope of an outbreak in 4 days before you move to phase 2. Phase 2 is a surveillance and the surveillance and epidemiology provides timely evidence of an outbreak's extent to support decisions by the incident command. I'll get into that a little bit when we start talking about the zones and the areas. Phase 3 is a recovery phase, and that's where our surveillance and epi have indicated that FMD is under control. And there's a plan implemented to recover to a disease-free status. And then phase 4 is that the U.S. is declared free of FMD. Very straightforward. The most important part of this, and this is in my opinion, is going to be the jump between phase 1 and phase 2, and I'll talk about that in a second. When we start getting into the type structures, the types are pretty easy to understand. A type 1 is a focal outbreak, very small, limited number of animals, okay? Type 2 is getting into a moderate regional. Type 3 is a large regional event. Type 4 is widespread or national. Type 5 is a catastrophic one. And then Type 6 is even more catastrophic, where everybody's involved in North America. And so, as far as I call it, you're going from bad to worse, because the first case is bad regardless. So let's talk a little bit about the heightened alert phase. This is the phase where things are going to happen as far as if it's in Mexico or in Canada, we're going to be doing everything we can here to get prepared for the potential incursion of that disease in the United States. You can read through kind of the steps that are going to be going on. From an industry perspective, a heightened alert phase means that our education and outreach goes into overdrive. And here's some examples of some of the stuff we have at Pork for our producers on what to do if you suspect foreign animal diseases and how to report that. How would you identify them, and what you should do the day of an outbreak to make sure that you're part of the solution for the response. If you want any of these things, you can come to me and I can help get those to you. Phase 1, okay, the most important phase, and this is where the Confed Prep plan comes in, and we start talking about the areas, the zones, and the premises. So I'm going to talk a little bit about how that occurs. I got to give some props to USDA. They've done a tremendous job with the Confed Prep plans over the last couple of years. And if you haven't logged on and gotten your password to get in there to read these things, I highly encourage you to do it, because it's totally different stuff from what we were doing back in 2001 and 2. In the world of planning. So go read these plans. So in the plans today, if we're sitting there, we don't have an FMD outbreak, we're in a free zone. But if we do get an outbreak, then you're going to have an infected premises. So that's pretty straightforward. Around that, you're going to throw up your infected zone. Now this is going to be in the judgment. How big this is in the judgment of the animal health authorities at the time. But usually the normal thing that you hear is 6.2 miles. In that infected zone then, the responsibility of the animal health authorities is to identify those premises. So you know where your infected premises is. So contact premises are those premises where you have some reasonable epidemiological evidence to suggest that the disease is transferred to that site. So anybody that meets that epidemiological definition of a contact premises would become a contact premises. Those producers that, or groups that are out there with susceptible animals that are far enough away and there is no epidemiological link, but they do fall within the infected zone, are basically going to be called suspect. The reason this zone is important because it helps you focus your response activities to those areas that you'd have a higher probability of potentially finding the disease. And you'll learn that veterinarians love circles and zones. So we don't just stop with an infected zone. Around that, what you're going to end up doing is throwing up a second zone, which would be your buffer zone. If you add the buffer and infected zones together, you get the control area, okay? Again, the state vet and the area vet in charge are going to be really kind of setting what the size is, but if you read in some of the fine print of the plans, unless this has changed, so tell me if I'm wrong, John, it could potentially be that you have your infected zone at 6.2 miles, but the rest of the state is considered a buffer. And so the whole state might be a control area to begin with in an outbreak. Granted, that would be a lot of different premises out there that you'd have to identify. So you add that together, you get your control area. In that area, you're going to have farms with susceptible animals, and those are called at-risk premises. Another concept that you're going to hear today is a monitored premises. This is a really great concept, and one we're shooting for in the secure pork supply is to be able to provide enough information to the state veterinarian that our site is different and that it is monitored and that there are reasonable assurances of absence of disease on those sites. So you'll hear that terminology used today. You'll probably even hear the terminology compartment, but I like monitored premises. That's a great idea from my perspective working in the pork industry. Around that, again, we're going to throw up another zone. This would be the surveillance zone. This is technically part of the free zone, but it's an area where they're going to focus some type of population-based surveillance in order to get a feel for whether the disease has moved out of your control area. Those locations in the surveillance zone would be called free premises. If we use vaccination, there's two types of vaccination zones depending on how you use it. You have a containment vaccination zone, or you could have a protection vaccination zone, and we can get into that a little bit in the scenario. If we get to that point, the key is, though, is there's a mechanism to identify the zone where you're going to use vaccine, and so if you do use vaccine in those zones, those are vaccinated premises. I like circles, but in the Confed Prep documents, they like to actually use some type of geographical. And since this doesn't have a state name on there, I'll call it Patrickville. This is kind of how it would look. And again, it falls to the state animal health authority to kind of figure out what the reasonable size for these things are. But in my opinion, the day we have an FMD outbreak, if we don't have enough information to make good decisions on the size because we're lacking information on premises and movements and that type of thing, this is going to be a pretty big net that our state veterinarians are going to throw out there to try to control the disease. So real quick here as we move along, so that's from getting from basically phase 1 to phase 2. Once you start getting into the phase 2, you can start determining your outbreak steps based upon the type. Now, a focal outbreak, you could very well go in there and consider stamping out as long as you have the information to support that this disease hasn't spread and you've got the resources to do it. And I'm not going to read through this slide because I want to get to the exercise. On a moderate one, you could continue doing stamping out activities, but you're starting to think about maybe, can we do other things? Is there ring vaccination? Are there other steps that we can do to include in this type of an outbreak to help, like I'd like to say, work a little smarter and harder? As you get into a large regional outbreak, you need to start thinking about, all right, do we need to consider something other than stamping things out? Really, that's when you start getting into the real hard questions about vaccination, and you might start going in and looking at a targeted approach to trying to suppress this outbreak while limiting the number of animals that you're going to have to euthanize and dispose of. Start getting into the widespread outbreaks. This is what I call kind of the oh crap moments where you got to start looking at other opportunities to control this disease, or even starting to think about learning to live with it. And this is where you start going into the big questions about how you want to use your vaccine, as far as do we want to keep these animals living and in production, and then you start getting into other ideas about, we're going to start trying to learn to live with this thing and work on a longer strategy for eradication while conserving mammalian protein. Catastrophic, again, we start getting into the world of living with the outbreak, and those details I think will come out as we start moving forward on the scenario here. But hopefully that gives you an idea as we start moving through this the scenario today. We should be able to get a feel for what phase we're in. We should be able to start getting a feel for the type of outbreak. And I encourage everybody to go back use that document today. Go back and look at those things underneath that, those recommendations for each of those, and see, sound like good ideas, sound like a bad idea? What are the problems with doing it? Where could our successes be in doing that? And I'm looking real forward here today to hearing the discussions about working a little smarter and not harder in response to foot and mouth disease.